Black janitor's son saves billionaire's daughter. What happens next changes his life. Before anyone at Wexford Academy would remember his name, before headlines or cameras or private invitations, there was just Elijah. 11 years old, mop in hand, eyes too sharp for his age, moving like a shadow across the polished marble hallways of a school that was never built for him. Elijah Walker was not a student at Wexford. He was the janitor's son. Every morning before the sun cracked the sky, Elijah and his father, Malcolm, arrived through the service entrance. The main gates, with their gold-trimmed crest and red-brick grandeur, were for limousines and Teslas and the glossy-haired children of America's elite. Elijah entered through the back, where silence hung heavier, where the scent of bleach masked the truth of who kept this place standing. The Walkers lived in a maintenance quarters behind the gymnasium, a converted storage room with a rattling mini-fridge and 2 bunks welded into a wall that once held paint cans and broken sports equipment. Still, it was theirs. Elijah never complained, but he noticed. He noticed everything. His father, a man of few words but endless integrity, had one rule. Head down, do the work, be better than what they expect, but never expect them to see it. Elijah had believed that, until something began shifting deep in his chest. A subtle defiance, not loud, not angry, just the desire to matter. On this particular Monday morning, the air felt wrong, heavy, humid, electric. Elijah was wiping down the window panes in the East Wing hallway when he heard it. A distant pop, then a smell. Acrid, faint, like burning wires. The academy had long ignored Elijah, but today he noticed what no one else did. He dropped the cloth, narrowed his eyes toward the ceiling vent where the scent was leaking. Then the alarm blared. Chaos erupted. From every hallway and classroom, students screamed. Teachers herded them like flocks, and the building shook with the sound of panicked footsteps. Emergency lights blinked red, then white, then red again. But Elijah ran the other way. While hundreds stampeded toward exits, Elijah dashed to the West Wing. He had seen her go there, Clara Belmont. The headmaster's voice had boomed over the loudspeakers. "Evacuate immediately! Avoid the West Wing!" That meant one thing. Danger was real, and someone might be left behind. Clara Belmont, daughter of tech magnate Alexander Belmont, had walked into Wexford like she belonged in a different world. And she did. A world with private jets and marble kitchens and designer pianos in rooms no one played in. Elijah had seen her more than he'd heard her. She didn't speak to people like him, but that didn't matter now. Flames licked the lower corners of the corridor near the West Theatre room. Smoke clawed down from the ceiling vents like fingers hunting skin. Elijah pulled his shirt over his nose, dropped low, and ran. He found the door to the rehearsal room locked and hot to the touch. Inside, through a narrow glass pane, he saw her, curled on the floor, coughing, eyes glazed. Her gold-trimmed Wexford blazer blackened by soot. "Clara!" he shouted, banging the door. No response. The smoke was already swallowing the walls. He kicked once. Nothing. He kicked again, harder. The glass cracked. "One more." The door burst open with a blast of heat that staggered him. Elijah surged forward, wrapping his arms under Clara's shoulders and dragging her away from the collapsing stage curtain. "Come on," he gasped. "Don't stop breathing." She was light, too light. Her head lolled back, ash tangled in her hair, and a soft, rattling breath escaped her lips. The ceiling groaned. A vent dropped with a screech behind him, sparks bursting as it slammed the floor inches from his heel. Elijah didn't stop. Down the hallway, the smoke grew thicker. Visibility, none. His throat closed up, lungs burning like they were lined with sandpaper. but he remembered the maintenance layout, the side exit near the utility closet. If he could just... A final turn. A door. He slammed his shoulder against it. It gave. Outside, fresh air hit like a slap. Screams echoed. Firefighters were finally arriving. A teacher spotted him, rushed forward. "Oh my God, that's Clara! Somebody help!" Hans pulled Clara from his arms. Others grabbed Elijah, tried to lay him down, but he resisted. He needed to see her wake up. Just once. Just for a second. She didn't, not yet. The EMTs surrounded her, voices blending into chaos. Elijah dropped to his knees on the sidewalk, barely breathing, covered in soot and blood and smoke. He looked back at the burning school. And then he heard it. Who is that kid? Was he carrying her? I think that's the janitor's son. The words came like whispers, and Elijah knew, in that moment, everything had changed. But not because they saw what he did, because for the first time, they saw him. At exactly 7:04 a.m., Jamal Evans, just 11 years old, swung open the double doors to the East Wing corridor of Eden Hill Academy. The handle was still warm from the morning sun, and his palms, calloused from mopping too long for someone his age, clung to it out of habit. The scent of lemon disinfectant followed him like a badge. While the elite students of the academy began arriving in Teslas and black Escalades, stepping onto the marble floors like they owned the building, Jamal was already halfway through his third hallway of the morning. No one noticed him. That was how it had always been. His father, Marcus Evans, had been the school's janitor for more than a decade, a ghost in coveralls who kept the legacy of this private Manhattan institution polished and invisible. They lived in a cramped studio attached to the side of the gym, which used to be a coach's supply room. The window barely opened, the mattress sagged in the middle, and their air conditioner sounded like it was trying to cough itself into retirement. But it was theirs. Jamal didn't complain. Not when his father had spent half his life being grateful just to have keys to a building no one thought he belonged in. But Jamal's silence wasn't obedience. It was observation. He saw everything. He saw the way students laughed too loudly when Clara Belmont walked in, the daughter of billionaire venture capitalist Richard Belmont, whose name hung in gold letters above the school's innovation center. She wore a different headband every day. Not because she needed to, but because no one else could afford to. He saw how some teachers' smiles were wider for students with legacy surnames. He noticed which hallways got cleaned more often, because donors walked through them. And he saw the wire. It was small, tucked behind the water fountain on the second floor. At first, it looked like a rust-colored stain. But Jamal knew stains. This wasn't that. This was the fray of something burnt, smoke blackened and humming slightly if you stood close enough. He had felt it one morning as he leaned in to scrub the tile. The metal of the fountain was warm. Not warm like sun. Warm, like wrong, he told his father. Marcus paused. He placed his bucket down, took out a flashlight, and inspected the outlet near the base. Could be a short, he said, worry wrinkling his brow. We'll monitor it. They did. For 3 days. The humming grew louder. So did the static crackle behind the walls. Jamal approached the front desk. Mrs. Keegan, the school's admin officer, was halfway through a protein bar and a phone call. He waited, then waited longer. When she finally glanced up, her face barely moved. Yes? There's something behind the second-floor fountain, Jamal said, voice steady. Electrical. Did your father report it? He checked. But I think it's worse now. She looked at him like he'd interrupted a board meeting. I'm sure it's nothing. That building is wired by union electricians. I heard something. She waved him off with a hand motion, barely above a shrug. Go mop the science lab. It smells like formaldehyde. That was it. Dismissed. That afternoon, during his break, Jamal sat alone in the boiler room eating a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in foil. The hum of the machinery vibrated through the walls. He took out his spiral notebook. On the cover were doodles of fighter jets and schematics. He flipped past sketches of circuit breakers and scribbled notes on airflow systems. He began to diagram the hallway where he'd seen the frayed wire, tracking the heat spots, ventilation pattern, and proximity to high-voltage panels. He wasn't going to be ignored. Not if someone's life was at risk. Then came Monday morning. It was humid. Heavy air. The school smelled strange. Sharper. He noticed it while scrubbing the gym floor, something bitter clinging to the air vents. He checked his watch. 8:13 a.m. He moved toward the second floor on instinct. That's when it happened. The alarm didn't scream. It coughed at first. Then a single red bulb blinked in the far corner. Jamal smelled it before he saw it. Burnt plastic and heat, and then smoke. Real smoke. Thick, curling out of the edges of the hallway vents like steam. Students screamed. Teachers shouted. Hallways erupted into chaos, but Jamal didn't move. Not toward the exit. He ran in, toward the second floor. Toward the source, toward the place where 3 days earlier he'd warned them. Help! Please, someone! The voice cracked through the noise like a needle. It was coming from the south wing dressing room. Jamal knew that voice. Clara Belmont. He didn't hesitate. He bolted toward the sound, dodging fleeing students, ducking under collapsing banners, and charging into the cloud of smoke that now filled the corridor like floodwater. The closer he got, the hotter it became. The door to the drama wing was slightly ajar. Jamal pushed it open, smoke billowing out and stinging his eyes. Inside, the lights were flickering, and flames licked the far wall. And there she was, Clara, in a white rehearsal dress, coughing violently and slumped against the vanity table. Clara! Her eyes opened, barely. Jamal rushed to her, dropping his mop handle and pulling his shirt over his mouth. He knelt beside her, hooking an arm around her back. I've got you, he whispered. Stay with me. She moaned faintly, her legs too weak to move. The ceiling groaned above them. No time. Jamal lifted her, not as someone saving a princess, but as a boy who'd carried heavy buckets every morning since he was 7. He stumbled toward the exit, the heat pressing against him like a living thing. Each step was a battle. Each breath felt like swallowing sandpaper, but he made it. Down the hall, past the flames, through the stairwell door. And then, out. The morning sun was blinding. Firefighters swarmed past him. Sirens screamed, and as Clara's body was pulled from his arms and laid onto a stretcher, someone finally asked, "Who is that kid?" No one knew, but that was about to change. The night after the fire was a blur. Sirens, shouting. Emergency lights cutting across the courtyard in frantic sweeps of red and white. Jamal Evans sat on a folding chair just outside the gymnasium, wrapped in a wool blanket that smelled like hospital sheets. His face was streaked with soot, his arms trembling from adrenaline and heat exhaustion, and yet no one really saw him. The paramedics were focused on Clara Belmont, who lay on a stretcher 10 feet away, an oxygen mask over her face, and 2 EMTs murmuring medical jargon around her like she was the president's daughter, which, in a way, she was. Her father, Richard Belmont, hadn't even made it to the scene yet, but everyone moved with the gravity of his name. Jamal's legs shook, not from the cold, but from everything finally catching up to him. The moment he'd seen Clara slumped against that vanity, eyes barely open. The feeling of the floor softening under his feet. the breath in his chest burning like fire itself. He hadn't thought. He hadn't planned. He'd just moved. A nurse eventually handed him a bottle of water, which he held but didn't drink. A security officer took his name, asked a few questions, nodded, and disappeared. No cameras, no reporters, no one asking for details. Until later. Much later. He was sitting in the back of the ambulance, not injured enough to be admitted, but not calm enough to be sent home, when a tall man in a navy blue suit stepped up to the open doors. Richard Belmont. Jamal recognized him instantly. He'd seen his face on building plaques, in newspaper articles framed inside the school lobby, and once, from a distance, shaking hands with the mayor during a funding event. The man was sharp-eyed, commanding. He looked like a person who didn't just run companies, he ran conversations. "You," Belmont said, pointing at Jamal with a confusion he didn't bother hiding. "You carried my daughter out." Jamal stared, nodded once, his voice caught in his throat. "Who are you?" Belmont asked, this time with suspicion lacing his tone. "Jamal Evans. My dad's the janitor here," he replied, the words small. Belmont blinked, as if trying to connect those dots. "You're not a student." "No, sir." The silence between them was long, heavy. Belmont's expression flickered somewhere between disbelief and discomfort. Then he turned to the EMT beside him. "Is she conscious yet?" The man shook his head. "Not yet, but stable. She should be okay." Belmont gave a tight nod and turned back toward the flashing lights, not even offering a word to Jamal. No thank you. No acknowledgement, just dismissal. By the time Jamal and his father walked home that night, through the side gate, still smelling of smoke and burnt wood, it had already begun. The reshaping of the story. In the morning, the school released an official statement. An incident. A short circuit in the lighting system. Students evacuated. No serious injuries. The media picked it up, ran a short segment on the bravery of staff, without naming names. Jamal watched it from their small TV while sitting on the floor, knees pulled to his chest. "They said staff," he muttered. Marcus, seated beside him on the edge of the mattress, didn't take his eyes off the screen. "You expected them to say your name?" "No. I don't know. Maybe." Marcus exhaled. "People like them, they'll always thank the uniform, never the man inside it." Jamal stared at the screen as Clara's face appeared. A stock photo from the school's website, her hair perfect, smile poised. Clara Belmont in recovery after school incident. Heroic action by unnamed personnel helped ensure her safety. "Unnamed," Jamal repeated. His name wasn't even a footnote. At lunch he didn't eat. His hands were still blistered. He didn't tell his father about the dreams, how he kept hearing the pop of wires and Clara's soft moan, how he'd wake up gasping for air, convinced smoke was pouring under the door again. The next morning, they returned to school. Despite the fire, despite the chaos, Eden Hill Academy was already running again. One wing was closed, but students were back in uniform, gossiping in the halls, ordering matcha lattes in the cafe. The moment Jamal stepped into the building, everything slowed. People looked at him differently now. Not admiration, not respect, but wariness. As if he had crossed a line. As if, by running into that fire, he had made himself visible. A teacher passed by and offered a tight smile, but her eyes flicked away before he could return it. One student whispered, "That's the janitor's kid, right? The one who, dragged her out." "Yeah, I heard it was just a hallway fire." Not even a real rescue. He probably just made it sound dramatic. Jamal kept walking, head down. In the boiler room that afternoon, Marcus handed him a folded envelope. "Found this taped to the front office window," he said. "Addressed to you." Jamal opened it slowly. Inside was a short note, handwritten. Crisp cursive. "Jamal, thank you for what you did. I remember everything. Clara Belmont." Just that. He read it twice. And for the first time since the fire, he exhaled something that felt like relief. But it didn't last. Because not an hour later, when he passed by the office again, he overheard Mrs. Keegan talking on the phone. "Yes. We've made sure the Belmont family knows the staff handled it." Pause. "No. The janitor's boy won't be mentioned." "It'll confuse the story." Jamal stood still, invisible again, by design. That night he asked his father, "If no one says your name, did it really happen?" Marcus put a hand on his shoulder. "You saved her. That's real." "Doesn't matter what anyone prints." Jamal nodded, but the ache didn't go away, because he didn't want a trophy. He didn't want headlines. He just wanted to be seen. And tomorrow, for the first time in his life, he would no longer walk these halls with a mop in his hand, but with a choice. Speak up or disappear again. And Jamal Evans was done disappearing. Jamal Evans stood outside the auditorium doors, the early morning sun casting long shadows over the fresh caution tape still crisscrossed over the back wing. Students brushed past him in clusters, whispering about rehearsals being moved, fire drills, and who had already posted about the incident on their private school gossip thread. He wasn't in uniform, didn't have a badge, didn't carry a hall pass. And yet he stood there like he belonged. For the first time he wasn't holding a mop or pushing a cart. He wasn't invisible. And they didn't know what to do with that. The rumors had already twisted reality. Some students said Clara had fainted from stress. Others claimed she had fallen in a controlled evacuation. A few even said she was never in any danger, that the fire was overblown. But Jamal had seen her collapsed in that room. He had carried her out while the world burned behind them. And now, the truth was slipping out of his hands. That afternoon, he found Clara alone in the courtyard, sitting beneath a massive oak near the art wing, her legs tucked under her, sketchbook on her knees. The sun fell in soft shards through the leaves, scattering light across her hair. She looked up as he approached. "You got my note?" she asked softly. Jamal nodded. "Yeah." "Thanks." She paused. "I tried to tell them about you." "About what really happened?" Jamal shrugged, then sat on the stone ledge near her. "Doesn't matter. Not really." "Yes, it does," Clara said more firmly than he expected. "They think someone from the faculty carried me out, one of the gym teachers. It's easier for them that way." "You don't fit the narrative." He turned toward her, eyes narrowing. "What narrative?" "That heroes wear blazers, that they have last names on plaques and family wings in the library." Jamal gave a dry laugh. "Guess janitor's kids don't make the donor brochure." She hesitated. "They should?" He looked at her then, really looked. She was different than the version he'd always seen flanked by security or laughing with her polished friends. She was quieter now, more grounded. Her voice wasn't clipped or performative. It was real. "You remember all of it?" he asked. Her hands tightened around the sketchbook. "Bits." "The smoke. Your voice. You told me not to give up. That it wasn't over." He said nothing for a moment, then leaned forward, elbows on knees. "You didn't give up. That's what matters." Clara closed her eyes. "I'm not sure they'll let me talk about you publicly. My dad's already..." She stopped herself. "Already what?" She sighed. "Managing, that's what he calls it. We're managing the narrative. That's his language.
He's furious I was in that building at all. Because it made him look weak, Jamal guessed. She flinched, then nodded. And because I didn't tell the right version of the story.
I told the true one. A silence settled between them. Then Clara pulled something from her backpack. A tablet. She swiped through until she landed on a rough draft of a school blog article titled Heroic Moments During the Founders' Day Fire. She turned it toward him.
You're not in it, she said. They replaced you with a placeholder, a school employee.
Jamal's jaw clenched. That's not a mistake, he said.
No, it's erasure, she replied. He stared down at the screen, at the sentences that reduced him to background noise.
He thought about every hour he had mopped these floors, the times he'd been told to stay out of the way, to speak less, to clean faster. He thought about the fact that he had risked everything and was still less than a footnote. They're not just ignoring me, he said, voice low. They're rewriting it so I was never there.
And they think no one will notice, Clara added.
He stood abruptly, walking a few steps toward the edge of the courtyard, his fists tightening. What if they're right? Clara followed.
They're not. I remember. I know what you did. And I'm not going to let them erase it. He turned to her. Why do you care? She met his eyes, firm. Because when I was lying on that floor, everything I was supposed to be, perfect, composed, untouchable, none of that mattered.
And you saw me as a person, not a name, not a headline.
Just a scared girl. You didn't look away. He looked down. And now everyone is. She touched his arm, light but steady.
Then maybe it's time we make them look.
That night, Jamal stayed awake, staring at the ceiling above his bunk while the fan rattled gently in the dark.
He thought about the article, the school's silence, his father's quiet sighs. He thought about what Clara had said. Make them look. He wasn't a writer. He wasn't rich. He had no access to boardrooms or PR teams. But he had something. He had the truth, and it was time to speak it. Not for attention, not even for credit, but because if people like him didn't speak, the world would keep pretending they didn't exist. He grabbed his father's old notebook from the shelf, tore out a blank page and began to write. Not a speech, not a complaint. A statement, a challenge, because the fire hadn't just exposed faulty wiring. It had exposed everything, and Jamal Evans wasn't done. He was just getting started. The Monday morning air at St. Augustine Academy was heavier than usual. Students filed in wearing freshly ironed uniforms, laughing too loudly at things that weren't funny. Conversations that usually buzzed were quieter, eyes flicking to corners as if afraid of what they might see. Jamal noticed it the second he stepped onto campus. Not the fire damage, which had already been boarded up and glossed over, but the tension. The kind of tension that follows silence too long and truth too close. They were waiting for something, and he was about to give it to them. His notebook page, handwritten, raw and fiercely honest, had made its way online over the weekend. Clara had taken a photo and posted it anonymously on the school's private student forum. No names. Just a heading. What you didn't see that day. And beneath it, Jamal's words. I was the boy behind the mop. The one you walked past without a glance. The one you called kid, not by name. But when fire broke loose, I didn't run. I ran toward the smoke. I carried a life in my arms, not because I wanted to be a hero, but because no one else was there. And now you want to write me out of the story. It spread faster than either of them expected. Some students dismissed it, called it fiction, but others asked questions, quietly. Carefully. Who wrote it? Was it true? By Sunday, someone had traced it to Clara's account, and by Sunday night, the firestorm had begun. Clara's inbox exploded with messages. Some supportive, some angry. Her father, Charles Belmont, called her into his office at midnight. She stood alone, still in her sweatpants, arms crossed tightly over her chest, as her father paced in his study, lined with legal degrees and polished globe bars. "What were you thinking?" he asked, voice controlled but sharp. "I was thinking people deserve the truth," she answered. He stopped pacing. "You posted that knowing it would implicate the school. Me. And him. A janitor's son. His name is Jamal." Charles's jaw clenched. "It doesn't matter what his name is if you've just jeopardized everything this school stands for." Clara stepped forward. "Then maybe the school stands for the wrong things." There was silence. Cold, quiet silence. Charles looked at his daughter as if seeing her for the first time, not as a commodity or future heiress, but as a threat to the script he'd written long ago. "You need to stay quiet now," he said. "No," Clara replied, her voice trembling but firm. "You need to listen." At school the next day, whispers chased Jamal down the hallway. Not of mockery anymore. Of speculation, admiration, resentment. He moved like a spark walking through gasoline. His English teacher, Miss Gardner, stopped him just before first period. "I read it," she said quietly. Jamal tensed. "I believe you," she added. He exhaled, not realizing how tightly he'd been holding himself together. "I want you to read it aloud," she continued. "In class." His eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "I am. Because the only way this changes is if the truth has a voice." He hesitated. "They're not ready." Her gaze didn't waver. "That's not your problem." The bell rang. By the time second period started, the class was already buzzing. When Ms. Gardner announced Jamal would be reading something aloud, several students exchanged knowing glances. Clara sat in the second row, her chin up, expression unreadable. Jamal stepped to the front, paper shaking in his hand. He didn't have to read the whole thing. Just enough. Enough to make it real. He cleared his throat. "My name is Jamal Evans. Some of you know me, most of you don't. But you've seen me. You just didn't realize it." Eyes began to lift from desks. "I was there when the fire started. I was the one who saw the smoke before anyone screamed. I didn't wait for an adult. I didn't check the rules. I ran." The room fell silent. "I found Clara Belmont unconscious backstage, and I carried her through a hallway filled with fire. My arms burned, my lungs tore, but I didn't stop." His voice wavered just slightly. "And when I got outside, when I handed her off to the paramedics, nobody asked my name." He paused. "They still haven't." No one moved. No one breathed. Then a voice from the back, Julian, one of the louder students, asked, "Why are you just saying this now?" Jamal turned, calm. "Because I didn't need you to believe me before. I needed to survive." "Now I want to live." Julian blinked. "And Clara?" She clapped. Once, twice. The room followed, slowly at first, then steadily. Not in pity, in recognition, but outside the classroom the walls were not so forgiving. By lunch, the school board had summoned Jamal's father to the office. Francisco Evans arrived in his faded work shirt, face weathered, hands still stained from cleaning chemicals. Principal Dresden sat behind his wide oak desk, hands folded tightly. "Mr. Evans," he began, "your son has caused quite a disruption." Francisco met his gaze evenly. "By telling the truth? By undermining institutional order," the principal snapped. Francisco leaned forward. "He ran into fire to save that girl." "Your institution didn't," Now you want to punish him for being braver than your whole board. Dresden bristled. We're simply asking for cooperation. Discretion. Francisco smiled, tired. You've asked for his silence long enough. Back in the hallway, Clara found Jamal sitting alone on the stone ledge behind the science wing. They're going to try and twist it, she said, sitting beside him. They already are, he replied. She nodded. But we're not going away. Jamal looked at her. No, he said, we're not. Because something had cracked. Not just the ceiling tiles from the fire, but the silence. And this time, it wouldn't be fixed with polish or paint. It would be rewritten. From the ground up, with names, with truth. And Jamal Evans, the janitor's son, wasn't just part of the story anymore. He was holding the pen. The whispers didn't stop. They multiplied. They moved through the polished marble halls of St. Augustine Academy like wildfire, bouncing off lockers and classroom walls. Some called Jamal a hero. Others, a disruption. But all agreed on one thing. He had become impossible to ignore. For the first time, his presence made people shift in their seats. Not because he was out of place, but because he forced them to confront the lies they had comfortably wrapped themselves in. Principal Dresden wasn't done. A memo circulated that week, tight-lipped, wrapped in formal language. Pending review of protocol violations during recent emergency events, all public statements made by students must be pre-approved. No names, but everyone knew who it was about. By Friday, a mandatory school assembly was announced. Topic: community values, structure, and respect. Clara leaned toward Jamal at lunch, her tone flat. They're trying to contain it. He nodded. Or bury it. But what they didn't know was that Clara had already arranged something more powerful than a speech. Proof. Video footage. Cell phone clips, snippets from the day of the fire, including one that caught Jamal bursting from the smoke with Clara in his arms. She hadn't shared it. Yet. I think it's time, she said. Jamal looked at her. They'll come after you too. She gave a small smile. Let them. That night, Clara posted the footage anonymously. No narration, no edits. Just the unfiltered, harrowing truth. The school's golden auditorium in flames, screams. Chaos. And Jamal, covered in ash, carrying her limp body, face locked in terror and determination. By morning, it had spread. Not just within the school, but across the city. News outlets picked it up within hours. Unknown boy saves tech heiress in blaze, one headline read. Student's bravery captured in viral clip, read another. Charles Belmont's phone rang non-stop. His PR team begged him for a response. He said nothing. Until Clara confronted him in his home office. You could have stopped this spin days ago, she said, but you let them erase him. Charles stood still behind his desk, hands gripping the edge. This isn't about that boy anymore, he said finally. This is about perception, influence, control. Clara's voice cracked. You mean power? Yes. You're wrong, she whispered. Power isn't being untouchable. It's being undeniable. He looked at her. There was a flicker, regret, maybe, but it passed. You don't understand the stakes. I understand enough. Back at school, Principal Dresden scrambled to issue a public statement, but it was too late. Reporters were waiting outside the gates. Parents were calling for clarity. Some praised Jamal. Others called for disciplinary review, claiming he'd compromised emergency protocols. Jamal sat quietly in the library as students watched the video on repeat.
Some stared at him like they were seeing him for the first time. Others avoided his gaze.
Ms. Gardner found him there. "They can't spin it anymore," she said, sitting beside him. He didn't look up. "They'll try, but now the world saw what you did." "I didn't do it for the world." "I know," she said. That's why it matters. Later that week, an emergency school board meeting was announced. Closed door, invitation only. Clara made sure she was on the list. So did her father. So did a teacher who decided to break rank. And so did Jamal Evans. It was the first time he'd ever been invited into a room like that. He stood in the center of the boardroom, small under the chandeliers, surrounded by adults in suits with voices that weighed more than their words. Principal Dresden cleared his throat. "Mr. Evans, you've created quite a stir." "I didn't mean to stir," Jamal replied. "I meant to speak." One board member, an older woman with sharp eyes, leaned forward. "We've reviewed the footage. No one questions your actions during the emergency. What we question is the aftermath, the reaction." Jamal's voice was calm. "The only thing I regret is that it took a fire for any of you to see me." Silence. Clara spoke next. "He didn't ask for attention. He saved my life. And your silence since then says more about this school than any speech ever could." Charles Belmont rose slowly. "I'd like to offer a correction," he said. "My daughter owes her life to Jamal Evans, and so does this institution. Denying that is not only unethical, it's unsustainable." Dresden stiffened. "This isn't about ethics. It's about boundaries." "No," Clara said quietly. "It's about truth." By the end of the meeting, the board agreed to a formal recognition. A speech would be made, a ceremony arranged, but Jamal wasn't satisfied. "I don't want a plaque," he said. "I want change." "Be specific," said one board member. So he was. He asked for a scholarship fund, not just for him, but for other staff children. He asked for revised emergency protocols. He asked for inclusion on the Student Advisory Council. And he asked that no one in the janitorial team ever be treated as invisible again. The board hesitated. Clara didn't. "I second every request," she said, "and if they're not granted, I'll take this story beyond this school." Charles closed his eyes, then, slowly, nodded. Agreed. Afterward, Jamal stepped out into the hallway, breathing in the air like it had just rained. Clara joined him. "You did it." He shook his head. "We did." But neither of them knew what was coming next. Because change, real change, has consequences. And the ones who'd been comfortable with silence. They weren't done yet. Monday morning arrived with skies so clear it felt almost staged. The media frenzy from the week before had started to cool, and the school tried to slide back into its regular rhythm. The janitorial scholarship fund was being quietly discussed behind closed doors. The recognition ceremony for Jamal had been scheduled, tucked at the end of the semester, of course. And while no one said it out loud, it was clear the administration hoped the story would fade by then. But Jamal Evans wasn't fading. He walked the halls of St. Augustine now in a clean uniform, a scholarship badge clipped to his chest like a scar he had earned. His presence was no longer invisible, it was undeniable. Students no longer whispered behind his back. They whispered in front of him, some with awe, some with resentment. "They're just trying to ride the wave," Clara warned him as they stood outside the science building. "They'll make it look like change, but it's control." "I know," Jamal said. "That's why I'm not done." He'd begun documenting everything, every meeting, every email, every subtle power play. When a teacher pulled Clara aside and quietly suggested she give the boy some space so the rumors don't grow legs, Jamal wrote it down. when 2 security guards trailed him in the library for no reason and asked if he needed help. Twice, he wrote it down. That week, Ms.
Gardner invited him to speak in her senior ethics class. Real courage, she said to the group, isn't loud, it's consistent. Jamal stood at the front of the room, nervous but grounded.
They keep calling me the janitor's son like it's supposed to shrink me, he said. But the truth is, I've always been that. And I'm still here.
That's not a weakness. It's my proof. Clara watched from the back. She didn't clap, but her eyes said enough. What Jamal didn't see coming, though, was the pushback brewing behind polished doors. That Friday afternoon, Principal Dresden met with a small group of board members and high-profile parents, including 2 who'd made significant donations that year. He's becoming a distraction, one of them said flatly. This boy is shifting the tone of the school. And Clara, another added, is clearly being used. Dresden, sitting stiffly behind his desk, nodded. We can't undo what's been done, but we can steer the narrative. So steer it. And they did. By Monday, a rumor had already begun to spread through the school. Jamal had manipulated the fire footage. Some claimed he'd exaggerated his role in Clara's rescue. Others said the scholarship was a PR move from the Belmont family, not a merit decision. The whispers returned, sharper now, laced with suspicion. He's just playing the system. Clara's protecting him because she feels guilty. He saved her? Sure. But what's he done since? Clara confronted Principal Dresden in his office that afternoon. You're behind this, she said. He blinked slowly. I don't control student gossip, but you feed it. I manage stability. This school is not a stage for social crusades. No, Clara said. It's a place that burns when you ignore the people in the walls. Meanwhile, Jamal received a formal letter. Mandatory review. Ethics and integrity inquiry. His scholarship, they claimed, was under evaluation due to new information. He sat in the cafeteria, reading it again and again. Across the table, Clara fumed. They're trying to silence you. They're trying to make me prove what I already survived. That night, Jamal didn't sleep. He went back to the school after hours, the building quiet, fluorescent lights buzzing like ghosts. He found the hallway where the fire had started. He touched the walls. He remembered the smell, the heat, the screams. He remembered running back into that smoke while others froze. And now they were asking him to prove he belonged. He opened his phone and started typing. A post. A message. They want to rewrite the story, but I lived it. I saved a life in these halls, and now I'm fighting for mine, not for pity. For truth. And if this place can't hold both, then maybe it doesn't deserve either. He hit send. By morning, it had gone viral. Students shared it, alumni reposted it, parents commented. And most unexpectedly, so did teachers, including Ms. Gardner, including the school's retired fire marshal, who confirmed that Jamal had triggered the first alarm before the system even registered heat. By noon, Dresden's office was surrounded, figuratively and literally. A walkout was planned. A protest, led not by outsiders, but by the very students the school claimed to represent. Jamal didn't organize it. He didn't need to. His silence had once made him invisible, but now his voice had become a signal. And the school, polished, protected, exclusive, was about to face a storm of its own making. The courtyard of St. Augustine had never seen anything like it. Hundreds of students, staff, even a few brave parents gathered in the midday sun, a quiet wave of unity in sharp contrast to the polished silence that usually defined the school.
Banners hung across the main gates, hand-painted signs in thick, urgent letters. Truth is louder than reputation. He ran through fire.
And now we stand for him. Jamal Evans belongs. At the center of it all stood Jamal, not leading, just present. He didn't speak first. That honor went to Clara Belmont. She stood on the steps of the auditorium, her voice clear through the megaphone. No makeup, no ribbon in her hair, just her words and a fire in her chest. You can't call someone a hero when it looks good for your image, and then try to erase them when they make you uncomfortable. She scanned the crowd, meeting the gaze of the faculty standing to the side. Jamal saved my life, not just during the fire. Every time he chose to walk through this school with his head up, when the system tried to bury him in silence, he saved something more. Dignity. And he gave that to me too. Whether you believe it or not. A murmur of support rippled through the crowd. Jamal's fists clenched at his sides. He had no idea how to process the moment. He'd spent his life blending into the edges, and now, here he was, undeniably center. The crowd began to chant his name, Evans. 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 The headmaster watched from behind the tall office windows. His phone buzzed constantly, donors calling, board members demanding answers, news outlets requesting statements. Downstairs, Principal Dresden's face was pale, not with guilt, but calculation. We need to contain this, he told the vice principal. How? It's already out. His post's been reshared over 2 million times. People are calling the district. Parents are threatening to pull donations. Sponsors are backing out of Founders Gala. Then we flip it, Dresden snapped. Call a press conference. Frame it as our commitment to diversity and integrity. Get the Belmonts here. If we stand next to them, we can't be accused of silence. But Charles Belmont wasn't answering his calls. Not anymore. That afternoon, an emergency faculty meeting was called, in the auditorium, with Jamal seated in the front row. Dresden stood on stage, flanked by the school's PR rep and the board's ethics chair. This school has always prided itself on excellence, he began, but recent events have challenged us to reflect. He looked directly at Jamal, as if expecting gratitude. We believe in second chances, in growth, and as a result, we are proud to announce that Jamal Evans Scholarship will be not only upheld, but honored through our new Legacy of Courage Award, which will be named after him. The room was silent. Applause trickled in from some corners, but Jamal didn't move. Finally, he stood. Thank you for the award, he said slowly. But you don't get to name me a legacy while still trying to silence my story. Gasps echoed through the space. He walked toward the stage, calm but unshaken. You didn't believe me when I said the wall was burning. You didn't want to see me when I was cleaning your floors. And now that you're under pressure, you want to celebrate me. He shook his head. Real courage isn't giving out trophies. It's admitting you were wrong, and fixing the system that kept me in the dark until I dragged someone out of the fire. A slow clap began. Then another, until the room, once dripping with polite performance, shook with applause. Clara stood. So did Miss Gardner, then others. Principal Dresden didn't speak again. 2 days later, an official announcement was made. Dresden would be taking a leave of absence. The school's board launched an internal investigation into the fire code violations and administrative response. The ethics chair resigned quietly, and in the hallway, a new plaque appeared outside the auditorium, in honor of Jamal Evans, who ran toward the fire when everyone else looked away. But even more powerful than the plaque was the shift that followed. Clubs formed. One, led by Clara and 2 other students, focused on student advocacy and equity reform.
Another, proposed by Ms. Gardner, was called the Quiet Voices Project, a mentorship program for underrepresented students. And Jamal? He returned to his locker one morning to find it freshly painted, a handwritten note taped inside. You gave us permission to speak. Now let us help you stay heard. It wasn't perfection, but it was change, the kind no one could bury again. The first day, Jamal Evans walked back through the front doors of St. Augustine, not as a janitor's shadow, not as the fire kid, but as a full member of the student body. Something in the air felt irrevocably different, not just for him, for everyone. The marble floors that once muted his presence now echoed with possibility. The uniforms, the hallways, the polished windows hadn't changed. But Jamal had. And the story that followed him into those halls no longer made people look away. It made them listen. He passed by the locker where someone had once written, "Stay in your place." Now, it held a small poster taped beside it, black and gold ink. This is our place now. His father, Marcus Evans, stood beside the school's new interim principal that morning, not in uniform, not holding a mop, but in a crisp blazer, name tag clipped to the chest. Facilities manager, Marcus Evans. A promotion, an apology. And in some ways, a quiet beginning. Proud of you, son, Marcus said softly as Jamal passed. Jamal nodded, eyes stinging with emotion he didn't want anyone else to see. But Clara was already beside him, her voice warm. "Ready?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, then smirked. "But you know they're still staring, right?" "Let them," she replied. "You earned this walk." Their steps carried them to the auditorium, now refurbished, renamed. On the wall behind the stage hung a new mural, a vivid depiction of a flame being parted by open hands. At the bottom, a line of etched steel read, "Sometimes the quietest acts burn brightest." Jamal took the stage, not as a guest, as the closing speaker for the school's equity summit. He adjusted the mic, cleared his throat, and let the weight of the moment hold him still for a breath. "I used to clean this floor," he began. "I knew every crack, every smudge that didn't belong. I could tell you which locker hinge squeaked the loudest, which classroom heater buzzed. I knew this school, down to the dust." A pause. "But the thing is, it didn't know me." He looked out over the rows of students, teachers, reporters, board members, and this time not a single eye looked away. "I wasn't supposed to speak. I wasn't supposed to ask questions. I was supposed to disappear quietly, clean up messes I didn't make, and be grateful for the chance to be invisible." Another pause, softer now. "But when the fire started, all of that changed." His voice didn't rise in anger. It deepened in truth. "I didn't run because I wanted to be a hero. I didn't carry her out for applause. I did it because no one else did. Because I could. Because I had to." He turned slightly, meeting Clara's gaze in the front row. "And in that moment, I realized something. Being invisible is a choice others make about you. But being undeniable, that's yours." He let the silence stretch before finishing. "So now I ask every one of you, what are you willing to see when no one else is looking? Who are you willing to be when no one's applauding you for it?" The audience didn't erupt in applause. They stood, one by one, until the room was on its feet. It wasn't a celebration, it was acknowledgement. Later that evening, Jamal sat with Clara under the old sycamore tree by the athletics field, the same one he used to sweep around without stopping. Now, it was where he chose to rest. "I didn't think it would ever feel like this," he admitted. Clara leaned against him lightly. "Like what?" "Like it mattered. Like I mattered. Without having to almost die for it." "You always did," she said.
The world just had to catch up.
A moment passed. You think it'll last? He asked. She didn't answer right away, then said, Maybe not, but it starts here. With us. With truth. With not letting them forget what almost happened. He nodded slowly. Then we make sure they don't. And in that quiet, beneath the fading gold of the late afternoon sun, a boy who once scrubbed the corners of a world that ignored him leaned back, shoulders no longer burdened with shame, but carried by purpose. He didn't want fame. He wanted change. And for the first time, he wasn't alone. If this story moved you, share it. Let people know that courage doesn't always roar. It sometimes walks quiet halls, mop in hand, heart wide open. Subscribe to our channel for more true-hearted stories about everyday people changing the world one act at a time. Your support helps us shine light on those who run toward the fire, not away. Tell us, where are you watching from? And who has been your Jamal Evans? We'd love to hear your voice.